Welcome to Unverified. I'm Laszlo Andrasi. I'm an architect with way too many interests, who also happens to know quite a few interesting people. I'd like to welcome you all to the first podcast episode, where I'm joined by Mario Romero and Jason Pieper, who are my friends and colleagues at Perkins& Will. We're diving deep into the world of computational design, how it has evolved, and the challenges it presents, and the way it's shaping the next generation of architects. Mario Romero is a computational designer and digital practice manager at Perkins& Will. His work deals in the melding of technology and architecture, including robotics, digital physical interface design, digital fabrication, and modular building automation with a focus on computational thinking. His previous works at Adrian Smith and Gordon Gill Architecture dealt primarily in the design and delivery of bespoke, super tall projects across the world. Jason Pieper is a project architect at Perkins& Will and is well versed in both technical and creative aspects of architecture. His work has been recognized for its thoughtful design solutions in the fields of sustainable architecture and computational design. In addition to his professional achievements, Jason is passionate about giving back to the architectural community. He has contributed to Open Architecture Collaborative and Engineering Without Borders, using his talents to help create positive change through architectural interventions. Since 2018, he has been involved in education, teaching at design technology and computational thinking at Boston Architectural College. We start the podcast by reflecting the evolution of computational design through the modern architectural history, exploring from how it evolved from just translating hand drafting into CAD to eventually evolving into parametric and computational modeling. But with this growing evolution comes a new challenge, tool fatigue. With new software and workflows emerging constantly, how do we balance that innovation with practicality? Next, we talk about mentorship and knowledge transfer. As these tools advance, so does our responsibility to guide young designers, not just in learning how to use the tool, but understanding when and why to use them. That brings us to education versus practice. Are architectural schools really preparing students for the realities of the profession, or is there a growing gap between what's taught in the classroom and what's expected in the workplace? Stick with us as we try to unpack these pretty heavy topics and share our own experiences navigating the ever-changing landscape of computational design. Let's get started.
No, so what I was saying is that
Yeah.
you had brought up a really interesting point. Like in coming up to this, you asked in like one of the questions that we were talking about, like how has computational design changed over the course of your career? And also you'd like brought up this notion of like tool fatigue, or like at least like digital like computation fatigue, I would say, or even posit within all aspects of our kind of lives at this point, because we're right smack in the middle of a sort of hype bubble, and I don't know, like those hype bubbles have conflated consistently over the past like 10 years into more and more of those hype bubbles. But what was fascinating to me is that early on in my career, and what I was saying is that for context, just so you know, Jason, Laszlo already kind of knows everything about me. I started working when I was like 17 in an architecture, like quote unquote career. Obviously, I was like doing what a 17-year-old in a profession would be given or be responsible to do, but I was like surrounded or like ingrained in that at an early age. And so like even as an early age, and I think everyone in this group is like as sort of millennials, like we were in like 1 foot ensconced in the kind of analog, 1 foot ensconced in the digital, right? Like that's kind of what we're known for. We're the first digital natives, whatever that means. And so I think we had such a kind of interesting, optimistic kind of perspective on technology at the time, almost like I mean, obviously we're young, right? Like we were just starting off. We thought like all this technology was talking about like how fresh new things were coming together and kind of conflating things together. And so because of that, like my perspective on technology within architecture was it was almost always 1-to-1. It was like there is no difference or distinction between the role that architecture exists within, or the role that technology exists in the world, and the role that architecture
Mhm.
exists in the world. They're kind of conflated, um, and especially because like we all experienced technology as a kind of like spatial apparatus almost, right? Like getting like I don't know, accessing the computer or the internet is like was a threshold into an entirely different space that we never really considered. Um, and so we were because of all of that, it's like we were super super optimistic and like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about the future of technology ensconced within the world of architecture and what we were doing with architecture. But now it's like fascinating because the response back is almost always that the fatigue of tools, the fatigue of like capabilities and capacities, and like how extraneous connecting those capacities together are is
Mhm.
almost, at least from my perspective and like my over the course of my career, it's almost taken on its own sort of life of like wrangling that. Like just like with our
Yeah.
the work that we do with interoperability, I think like that's sort of interestingly enough the meat and potatoes of computational design for me. That's kind of where I started. Like, oh, I can make this thing talk to this other thing, and like I don't have to like sit here and redraw the thing over again, right? Like,
Yeah.
it was fascinating. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting because like I've kind of had a similar relationship with uh, technology in the field of architecture. Like, from my perspective, it started out as high school drafting classes that are all done by hand, and then eventually you get into AutoCAD, and then oh my God, it's 3ds Max. Like, look at this super cool thing, and it's like you and two other guys who show up like early before school just so you can have more time playing with this stuff. And it was amazing because like it's using math to bounce the light in the scene and create these like super accurate renderings. You've got like this fidelity, this like truth seeking that comes from the development of these tools, and you just feel like you're part of something that is bigger than you. And uh, I mean, at some point, it felt like you could kind of keep your finger on the pulse of everything that's happening and everything that's changing. And then I don't know exactly where the transition happened, but there's just like an avalanche of stuff. And you go from being excited like, oh wow, like this is the beacon of truth, uh to now like this is just another thing in a sea of things. And what I find myself doing more so now is like somebody comes to me and says, oh, here's this like new tool, or like if I do it one way and you or Laszlo do it another way, I'm like, okay, I mean that's neat, but it feels like a cheap parlor trick. I'm more interested in what is the narrative, and like how is the tool in service of the narrative that I am trying to tell. I'm totally open to finding a new tool and using it, but like it needs to serve me better than the other tools that I already have in my kit. And as we're kind of talking about with like this new wave of interoperability that we've been working with, like this works better than all the down saving and uploading and whatever that I had been doing before. So like it fits. Um, are there a million other tools that we talk about that, I mean, objectively they're cool, but they lose my interest pretty quickly? Yeah, because again, it's just like the fatigue of, oh God, I just have to learn another thing.
Yeah.
I mean, like, so yeah, like the funny thing is that like, I mean, that Laz and I are in that other world of like needing to kind of constantly be. So 100% I feel you. Like, it's an overwhelming kind of rush of what exactly is out there, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not just like what's out there. It's how useful is it to me actually. It's almost like this like it's this weird ever-present feeling of like FOMO, but in the professional sense, where you're like, if I don't learn this thing or know about this thing, how far behind am I actually falling? And I was having this conversation with a good friend of mine, another architect, shockingly enough. And one of the running jokes is like, I think we're just kind of middle age, is the thing. Like part of it is like we're like right in this like fulcrum of our life where, and like that's, I say that like as a joke, but like not as a kind of bad thing, because we're this fulcrum, like the age in which we find ourselves at, the position that we find ourselves in our career is kind of allowing us to take a step back and a breather in regards to overall, at least I think, our contribution at large to the body of architecture, the work of architecture. Whereas I think, at least for me personally, before it was, this might be getting a little too philosophical, but it was like a journey of self-discovery more than anything else. And like that journey, that finding the thing that like thrilled me particularly was the thing that fed me the most. And so because of that, I like constantly sought out novelty within the world of, or like within the thing that I'm doing, right? Which is my profession. And I think now that I've like done the kind of, I don't know, the journeyman's kind of like role of going through and cutting my teeth and making at least some of my mistakes, right? Like hopefully I haven't made all of my mistakes. But like now I feel like, okay, I have the presence of mind within my career, within my contribution to the world of architecture, that I need to be a little bit more considerate, or hell, a lot more considerate about my time and like how I contribute to that space. At least that's kind of like my feeling to things.
Yeah.
Like, and it's also like 100% like not for nothing. I'm also just fucking tired sometimes. Like
Yeah.
where it's just like, okay, cool. This is like the 8th billion like AI rendering tool that you've shown me. I don't care anymore.
Yeah, no,
So
I think that
yeah, I would
you
love to
brought up
expand
a
on this point, Mario, actually. And considering that, we all work at, one of the biggest architecture firms in the world, a lot of
What
what we
firm is
do,
that, Laszlo?
Perkins and Will, Rhett. But in all seriousness, we don't work in isolation. So as kind of, it sounds like all three of us have a very similar kind of early career where we were the ones kind of innovating and trying to optimize our personal kind of, design or production or whatever task we were given at the time. And that got us to where we were right now. But now we're finding us in a position where we have to lead teams. And it's not just about how well we can produce a tool and like craft a narrative for ourselves, but how we can start guiding the next generation of designers, or even the older generation of designers, on using, tools that we see have potentially provided us a lot of benefit and could, feed them as well. So
Mhm.
where do you think, currently, thinking of existing state, how well do you think we're doing that right now in terms of communicating the tool's effectiveness that we find effective versus to our teams? So let's start with Jason.
uh, yeah, I mean, I think that's always an interesting balance. Like, um, we've got these tools and these workflows that are established, that everybody knows how to use. But at the same time, we're always, we're in a space where we're doing innovative work, and it's a challenge to understand, like, for one, like I have to test the tool enough to understand like what its value is, and then I have to like work with it enough to be able to uh, teach somebody else essentially how to go about and use it, because not necessarily, I'm not always the one who uses it. And I think at this point most of us have learned that we don't want to be the bottleneck. Like, we don't want to be the only person on the team that knows how to use the special thing. So it's so important to bring other people along with us in this journey, if for nothing else, and to like back check us and to challenge us and to make us better as we go through here. Like, the work gets better as a result of
I
that.
almost always find that my work improves by, bringing someone in on teaching them how to do a dashboard. And I'm like, oh man, they made some really cool visual I've never used. Right.
Exactly.
I mean, it's also, truthfully, I'm obviously, I think like the world of architecture, the profession of architecture is like highly dependent upon the kind of track and trajectory of like mentorship and apprenticeship. Like it's embedded within the kind of I think the fundamental makeup of the profession. And so like part of like, I don't know, I didn't get into computational design like randomly, right? Like I happen to have a knack within the kind of core skill set of computational like thinking. And there was somebody at the architecture firm that I was working at the time who was like, hey, Mario seems like he kind of knows how to do these things. I'm going to sit him down and I'm going to start teaching him this thing because, like you were saying, Jason, I don't want to be the only one who knows how to do this. Like, I want to be able to like take this person, have them help me, and have them do this thing because down the line, I know that they're going to learn this thing and they're going to teach the next person in line to be better, do it faster, be a little bit more critical about how it's done.
Do you think, kind of transitioning to one of our questions about education, do you think a lot of this computational design mentorship happens professionally, or are we seeing more and more of it happening in undergrad and graduate programs?
Jason?
I mean, so this is really interesting. So I've been teaching at the Boston Architectural College for the last 7 years. And I've, of course, noticed a change in like the skills that students are coming into the classes with. My role is essentially kind of teaching some of the common tools that architects use: Revit, Rhino, Grasshopper, Adobe, so on and so forth. And of course, like the interoperability, like how do you transition between all those tools, and like what are they good for and whatnot. But it's been really fascinating seeing kind of a range of students. It's for me, it's anything from like a second-year student all the way up to someone who's in their second year of their graduate degree, all together in this mandatory elective. And so many more of these students, like, you'd start out, you'd show them, how do you do masking in Photoshop? Like, wow, that's so cool. I've like never thought of this as a concept.
Yeah.
To like, people have
Non-destructive
got
editing?
these,
What?
yeah, but like people are now coming out of high school with years now of experience, not just in Adobe products, but also in different 3D modeling softwares too. So it's becoming less novel. And I think the education is starting sooner. The specialization is expected at a younger age. I think that kind of adds to this like sense of pressure and anxiety among younger people. Is like, oh, you have to know what you're going to do for the rest of your life when you're 13. That's silly. But at the same time, you end up with that kind of cohort kind of identifies at a younger age. Like, is this something I'm really interested in? Is it the computational aspect of it? Is it the cool shiny new tools that I like, or is it a style that I like, or some other aspect of the business? And people are getting to explore that at a younger and younger age.
Yeah.
Much to mimic Jason's kind of experience there. Yeah, like, so another for context thing here. I have younger brothers who are exactly half my age, basically. So like I witnessed that generation kind of growing into their own as like adults now, essentially. And absolutely, the thing is that like, first of all, that specialization is 100% like spot on. They have more access to a lot more information, and a lot more density of that information. And so like self-taught learners or self-starters, or like or people that are like kids who become very, very passionate about something and like start nerding out about something, they start pulling ahead within that particular interest. The others kind of don't, and they start lagging behind. So there's this like larger gulch of like technical kind of approach to things and exposure. And in regards to Laszlo, we were talking about also like core competency within in computational design or computational thinking in the profession, right? As like juniors come in. And my experience with that has been that it's kind of the same thing where you'll have like 3 or 4 like fairly like almost veteran like computationally veteran people or folks that I would never particularly consider as being like that computationally competent to where I would hand them a script and then I could just walk away and they'll kind of take over and explore, adapt, improvise, right? That is always fascinating to me, and it's happening, I would say, a lot more now recently.
Mm.
Um, but at the same time, the gulch of the opposite end is like fairly drastic, where it's like, here's this thing, I don't know how to operate with this thing at all, and like the rails need to kind of sort of be painted a little bit, which it's not a problem necessarily. It's just it's kind of again, it's like pointing to Jason's point of the specialization much faster and much younger.
Right. I guess one interesting thing is, do you think people who are specializing in computational design in their early education and their architecture undergrad programs and graduate programs, are their skills being leveraged by companies out of the gate, or are those skills kind of being sidelined for typical kind of architecture tasks? So yeah, I guess that's kind of the question. How do you think those skills are being leveraged on existing projects now?
I mean, I think like what I see is there is this impatience to be like right at the forefront immediately, or if by the time I'm 25, if I haven't done X, Y, and Z, then I'm somehow failing or behind. And like what I've come to discover is like so many, I think it's really more of a mindset. Like you have to be able to be one of those people that sees a learning opportunity in every task that you're given. And like my personal goal has not been to specialize really in anything. It's been to be well rounded. And anything from having an opportunity to like learn about doing a door schedule, or something that seems really mundane, or placing toilet accessories. It doesn't sound exciting in the moment, but man, if you've got that attitude that I want to learn and maybe I'm going to be a little creative about it and do it better, that kind of leads into opportunities. If you can kind of noodle off on the side and do your own thing, if you're passionate about some of these tools and like being recognized for it, then you're like, oh hey, look, I found a way to automate this process. Let's use it, and then you start getting recognized for at least nothing else being passionate. And I think there is an expectation of young professionals coming right out of school to have these skills in algorithmic design and some of these special softwares. It's just like, oh well, you're young, you must know how to do this.
Right. Yeah.
But like there's also a lot of just eating your vegetables that needs to be done that will eventually make you a better computational designer. Like if you know all of the boring, mundane parts about Mario, how a curtain wall comes together, that makes you much, much better at making an algorithm that makes a good curtain wall. It's not just like some silly, useless geometry that you've made. It's actually based in reality.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, like Jason, you also touched on like this notion of it's almost always like interesting the hiring practices of companies or architecture firms in a given kind of era of architecture, because I remember very like explicitly, this was like 10 years ago now. It was the height of like leveraging and utilizing my computational design skills to like lead and design like projects at another shop. And almost always the conversation like that shop ran real super light for teams, like 3 to 5 maximum for like fairly large projects that had hyper accelerated schedules. So the necessity to leverage computational design tools and computational skill sets was like, it was essentially a requirement, right? Like you can't do the kind of work and the amount of work that we needed to do without some sort of assistance or automation. But almost always when we went to our like managing director or like and told them like, hey, we need more people, like we have a lot of work, like down the line looking at what we need to do, we need X amount of like folks to like fill in the role. And the assumption was almost always hire the freshest like college grads you can, because they gotta know this like computation stuff. And it's like, it turned out that, and I think this is going to be the case throughout all kind of epochs in architecture. It just depends on like the application of it. Like, it turns out like, hey, just having a screenshot of like Grasshopper script in your portfolio doesn't mean that you're like capable of using that script or even like thinking through that, right? And so
Yeah.
there's almost always this disconnect between the kind of people who are like making the decisions as to like who belongs on like what teams or what projects, and how the kind of skill set actually gets divvied up. It's interesting.
Yeah. I just thinking through that, right? It's like if they have at least the script in their portfolio, it shows that maybe they at least opened it and have some interest, right? So then, the tutorial one is over,
Mhm.
and you at least have a clean slate to kind of train them up with your specific kind of way of doing things, versus maybe you hire a more senior architect that has the experience, but then they already kind of have their skill set, and
Yeah.
it's hard to adapt. So it becomes this weird, interesting kind of weird balance of things. And I guess one kind of tangent that question that's not really on here is thinking about how, like, because of the landscape of tools changing so frequently, and as you hop between shops or different firms, like they might not necessarily have the same tools that you had at your old firm. How do you think people are handling that now? Do you think that we're requiring people to reskill a lot more often than, I guess, in the past?
That's a really good question. I think, I mean, I'm of two minds with the answer. Like, one is like the more I would say like the less optimistic kind of perspective of it, and which is like Autodesk like unifies, becomes like the hive mind, and every architecture firm, every construction firm, every engineering firm gets on the same page, and guess what? We're using like Autodesk One now, right? Like that's the new platform. And so you'll never have to learn a new piece of software again. I think what's fascinating, and again, this is like following the same string of kind of conversation that we're having before, like Jason and Laz, about like the um like where we're at in terms of like the fatigue of applications, the fatigue of tools. I think that architecture as a profession has consistently proven that it will choose these without instigators, right? Without like outlying instigators, which fortunately, at least within the contemporary like past, or the contemporaneous like past 200 to 300 years, there have been like, without those instigators, we tend to kind of adopt the path of least resistance. And like part of that involves like, I mean, it's the reason that we're having this conversation. It's the reason that we're on this podcast. Not for nothing. The tool set, the technology within architecture is now part and parcel, I would posit, to the practice of architecture. Right? It's like it's just as much a part of the world of architecture as somebody's fascination with the kind of technical pen you would use, right? Or like the reasons behind why you would use those things. Like there is still a quality or craftsmanship behind the tool set. And I think because we're part of it is like we're being forced to do more faster in order to simply sort of exist as a kind of profession, just to and then at the same time, like, because we're almost forced to do more faster, that means that we have to adopt a platform and a technology and a kind of like tool set that is most directly applicable to the most common denominator, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
I think identifying that common denominator is actually the rub itself.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I find that, you mentioned earlier, you've got these different epochs of architecture, and I've seen that kind of comes in waves of like every 20 or 30 years. There's a seismic shift that happens.
Hmm.
You can think of like the late 80s. You've got the introduction of CAD software for the first time. Then by like the early 2000s, you've got parametric software and BIM and Grasshopper and stuff. And I think we're undergoing another shift with the AI tools. And throughout all of that, the underlying factor, it's not just yes, we can be more productive, yes, we can produce more, but like to what end and why are we doing that? I think it's always important to take a step back and ask yourself like what is really important. And it's there's a common thread that weaves through each of those different eras that defines what a good architect is. It comes down to good storytelling. It comes down to clear and concise communication with whoever it is that needs to digest it. We do this all the time in our own practice. Somebody cartoons out, 30, 40 sheets of drawings. And the first thing we do is, all right, let's figure out how do we get rid of half of them? Because, you don't need all, like, just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should do it. And so I think, with any of these tools, whether it's something that exists now or exists, 5 years from now, applying that critical thinking is something that's really important.
Yeah.
I think that's lovely what you've like touched on, Jason, because like truthfully, that is at the core or the crux of like computational thinking, right? Is like all of this is in service to the architecture, and it's always that tried and true kind of understanding of like when you engineer something, or how do you know you've engineered something to like the best that you possibly could? It's when you not when you can add more, but when you know that you can't take anything away. Like it's the same kind of application in regards to delivering like a beautiful architecture, to delivering a beautiful set, to working, I would say, like a beautiful kind of computational tool into your work, right? Like
Mhm.
it's about understanding the approach, the application, and like the kind of in between those things. So yeah, I just wanted to like comment on that and
That's
say
amazing.
that.
I find there's a big disconnect though between knowing how to use a tool to do something versus understanding what the end goal is. Just maybe because you have an individual, some computational designers, for example, especially really young ones, know they could do this really cool Grasshopper script, and they're so excited to do it on like every project. And like I feel them because it's like I want them to be able to do it for every project. But then
Yeah.
being able to communicate that the value of that to the senior designer or the project manager when the fee is super tight and they just need to do a very analog study on how the cast shadow is going across the context building. They don't need a full solar analysis. I guess what I'm trying to say is understanding those end goals I think are really important. And I guess one thing in particular, and I'm kind of guilty of it, is I think dashboards are kind of that for me right now. Like I love dashboards. I think they're very useful to be able to communicate information across to project teams. What I'm finding though is that we're doing dashboards without like an end goal in mind. Well, what are we specifically using the software for? What is the narrative, the story behind it? And I'm wondering, so that's my personal instance. It's the thing I'm trying to figure out kind of on my own journey with this thing. Do you guys have software like that in your own personal experience in the past, or you're dealing with right now, where it's like, damn, I want to use this this tool really bad, and I
Yeah.
know it provides value to me, but how do I communicate the value to everybody else? And it like to the client, to your senior project team members, kind of all the way down the line.
I've got a funny one. So I kind of learned this lesson, and it's about like 3 years out of school. And I just joined a firm, and I wanted to show off that like I knew these things. And you looked in that firm's portfolio work, and they they didn't have much in the the realm of computational design, but they were interested in supporting it. So I'm like, great, I'm going to show off. And their digital practice guy comes to me and is like, hey, we just got these like cool new like smart TVs that have these pens that you can draw on. And we also just got a 3D printer. I need somebody to 3D print a pen holder for me. And I'm like, oh, sweet. Like, here we go. And like, let's use Weaverbird. Let's use,
hell yeah,
analyzation tools. Let's use like all these cool. Let's throw every tool that I can possibly think of at this. And like, you go and you make something that's awesome in the computer and you hit 3D print and like it falls apart because like it doesn't work with the tool of the 3D printer. Oh, shoot, that's a bunch of wasted time. Well, now I have to think about how is it made and then what am I making? Okay, great. Well, I've made this thing and I think it's cool and I show it to them. Like, yeah, I don't like it. I'm like, and so it comes down to like, really, you just have to like know what the goal is. And it, it came down to just like the really fundamental aspect of design of like talking to your end user. What are they looking for? Talking to them about, what the function is of this thing holding pens. Where does it go? Like all this stuff that seems like, maybe I could jump past that in the line because I knew these super awesome tools, but the super awesome tools were good for what? If not for first covering the fundamentals.
I think that's I'm gonna follow up with you, Mario, in a second, but that's a very funny point. I think computational design, I feel like it's a misnomer of a name, where computational design to me is a tool, and design is everything that we do that, from, the narrative we've mentioned a million times, but like understanding context, like what is the use of what we're trying to do, and kind of wrapping all of those kind of elements of a project and understanding what's the best tool for the job, I think becomes really important. And sometimes, a lot of times it's computational design, but if you can just pick up a piece of like sketch paper and draw something out and it comes out just as good, I think that's a really valuable tool too. So it's understanding there's a difference between design and the tools we use to kind of translate that design into reality. So Mario, what's your tool that you've experienced that
mine's dumb, dude. Like it's like not even anything related to like computational design.
Nice.
Over the course of my career, I've found that I actually get super jazzed about project management tools. like things that help people coordinate people.
Yeah.
Because for the most part, I think it stems from a previous trauma in a competition, when like one of my first competitions in that other shop. But I think I had gotten in my head where it's just like I told some people how to do some things and what needed to be done at a particular point in time. And of course I was young, thinking that was more than enough. And so my whole thing is that I'm constantly seeking and trying to use and leverage these like project management assignment tracking tools that are like, they pop up like every 6 months. It's like a brand new one and like I adopt them because it's like, oh, this should be easier for people to kind of track for themselves. It never is. It turns out people just hate being told what to do. Like it's just
what was the one you just gave me and Laszlo this morning?
Oh, that was that's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's just like that's my predilection. It's just like I want to try these like dumb, fancy, like maybe that'll help all of us achieve like coordination and collaboration, like some nerd, right? The computational design stuff, like I think yes, absolutely. It's been the past, I would say 5 years, maybe 6 years. I almost internally cringe at times at the kind of phrase computational design at this point, like, which is kind of funny, right? Like part of like I technically have two titles at Perkins and Will. One is like the more boring but like more directly applicable one. The other one is computational designer. And So it's like funny that I'm like at this point now where like yes, it's a part of computational design, or it is like I exist or work in the space or the realm of computational design. When really what it is like it's Laszlo. To your point, there is design, there is architecture, there is the thing that we're kind of contributing to the body of that work, and it just so happens that I approach architecture, I approach that work from like the computation, like the compute side of things. Like I approach it from like the perspective of somebody who knows that a computer can be told and directed what to do and how to explicitly do that. So much like, I don't know, like in years past, like an architect who was really good at clay, the primary medium that they use to kind of shape and mold and design and experiment and express and like play in would be clay as like a medium. They would probably present in clay. They would probably use clay as like these like little like shorthands for things. It's the same thing with me and like computational design and like scripts and algorithms, and it's the I just use that as like the medium by which I sort of convey design. Sorry.
No, I think we need to expand on this one actually. We had a question, folks. What is computational design? And
Boy. Yeah.
oh boy. Do you want to keep going down the rabbit hole, Mario, or do you
I'm
want someone
totally
else
Jason.
to
It's
jump
up to I think it's up to both of you. Like it's
Ryan is like, and this is the point where I leave.
in? Yeah. Jason, floor is yours, man.
Oh, man. I like this. I think that's a really important question to get to. And I like to think of it kind of like Russian dolls. Like there's so many different aspects, things that fall within computational design. And, there's no one right or wrong answer, but like so many of these answers are really just nested within each other. Like you've got, as we talked about earlier, you got like the late 80s. Hey, I can make a computer draw a line, and it can tell me a couple things about that line, right? It could tell me the length, it could tell me the angle, it could tell me, maybe an area that gets enclosed. Like it's computing something.
yeah.
So that's cool. But then like you get into like the next era where you're starting to assign parameters. So like, maybe I draw a cube, but like I can now identify things about that cube that are not necessarily inherent to the geometry. I can say this cube is called lunchroom and it has an occupancy of a certain number of people, and like all these kind of abstract things get assigned to the geometry. And as you go forward a little bit later, you've got this algorithmic design, which is the next doll that's stacked inside, where maybe now you're starting to take some of these parameters and you're putting them into relationship with one another. You might assign a calculation that happens or a function that happens if this then that, or make this have X relationship to that. Like occupancy could be derivative of the area, and the type of use that it has. So like you can begin to form these algorithms that drive, if not the design, at least can start help you query aspects of your own design. And now we're getting into this era of AI and all the different subcategories of that. And again, I don't think that it's this totally separate thing. I just think it's yet another nested tool within this whole genre of computational design.
That's where I think the conversation gets really interesting. Thank you for listening to part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, dropping next Friday, where we begin to explore the impact of artificial intelligence on the practice of architecture. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe for more insights into the AEC industry. If you have any ideas for future podcast topics or guests, drop a comment or feel free to reach out to me directly through the links in the description.